Welcome to The Road To. I'm your host, Marlene Wecker-Barney. We have, as usual, a fun and exciting show today. This is our wrap-up show for the year 2014. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce our illustrious panelists and have them tell you a little bit about themselves, starting with James Parmalee.
Hi, thanks for having me. I run Republicans United for Tax Relief in the Northern Virginia Republican PAC, and I also host a few other shows on this station.
And welcome. And John Flannery.
I was relatively muted, actually. I'm John Flannery, and I do law and politics. I get paid for the law, and I'm a recovering federal prosecutor. And I guess today we're going to be talking a little bit about kind of the failure of our justice system to satisfy the citizens that it's doing its job.
Yeah. And Mike Lane.
Thank you, Marlene. It's always good to be back here. Our regular viewers may remember that I'm our token inside the Beltway guy. I come from Alexandria, but I started in Arlington politics, was once upon a time sentenced to a term of office on the Arlington County Board, moved through party politics office, and I'd like to confess for the public and everybody that last night at the Republican Advance, which is being held here this weekend in Chantilly, I was wearing one of Jim Parmalee's Republicans United for Tax Relief stickers.
Oh, okay, congratulations. And last but not least, Phyllis Randall, welcome back.
Phyllis is beyond speechless with that one.
Phyllis wants to wear a Republicans United for Tax Relief
Phyllis definitely
sticker.
does not. I'm Phyllis Randall. I am currently the Vice Chair of the Virginia Board of Corrections and the immediate past Chair of Virginia's Fair Housing Board. I am by profession a mental health therapist, and most importantly, I'm the mother of 2 boys. And I should say that my son's high school, Tuscarora High School, is going to the state championship in football and 5A. So go Tuscarora Huskies.
Go Tuscarora, go.
I will be rooting for them.
I will be there. We will be there.
Awesome. Well, we have an exciting show lined up, and we're going to start with a more serious topic. We have a lot of serious topics, but the passing of Marion Barry, former mayor of Washington, D.C., 4-term mayor. His funeral is being held today, actually. Any remarks about Mayor Barry?
Well, you know, I will say that no one is a one-dimensional person. People have grays to them. And if you grew up in Washington, D.C., and I did not, but if you talk to people who grew up here, they have just a deep and abiding affection for Marion Barry, and they talk about things like the youth jobs program, the motor voter program. And so there are some things about Mayor Barry's legacy that are positive and long-lasting, and they feel he's their mayor for life. On the other hand, there's obviously some things about him that were negative and left another legacy. And I think it's important to not make anyone a saint when they die, nor make anyone completely negative. I think there are hues to people, and that he was what he was, for the good and for the bad.
Well said.
Well, the remarkable thing about him is that we're having days of celebration of his life, and that couldn't be sustained if the people that were his neighbors and friends and supporters and even his opponents didn't recognize in him that the good outweighed the bad, and that whatever he did with drugs and stuff like that, it appeared to be a profile that could compromise his public figure, and did. But he still sustained his interest in contributing up until the time he died, and that's a remarkable statement about his resolve, even as we talk about the defects in his character.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he was a human being. I actually met him once in the early 80s. Basically was introduced to him, and that was about it. But he had a lot of power, and he had a reputation at that time that preceded him but now I'm learning much more about him as far as the good things that he did do, and
An extraordinarily successful politician.
yeah.
True, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, he was, just got, whether you liked what he was doing or didn't, and obviously there was a mixed bag politically. Some things he did great, some things not so great. That policies I didn't support, but some that I did. He was able to get things done. He really was, he knew where all the levers were. He knew, for an extraordinarily long period of time, he really sort of set the tone politically in Washington.
He also had a master's degree in chemistry. People don't realize that.
I
He had a
did not know
He had a
that.
master's degree in chemistry.
Well,
Yeah.
rest in peace, Marion Barry. So, Pope Francis, he's been making the news lately, and this is a show about politics. Francis has been called a great reformer. What do you think? I want to look at what his political implications of his reforms.
Well, I think the thing that was interesting was his instruction for bishops in America to stand down politically, and for him to actually punish a bishop as gently as he could by giving him a no responsibility job after, when Kerry ran for office, the bishop said he wouldn't serve communion to him, unable to divorce whatever the political position of representing people was from the faith-based standard that he applied to Kerry. And I think that the other thing that he's done, which parallels, I think, John the 23rd, is the notion of openness and possibility. It's too early to say what it will all mean, but in terms of relaxing the offense against people who are gay, encouraging the church to talk about social justice and deal with the affirmative rather than always being on the negative, I think is a reform that I hope continues. It's too early to say, and I don't personally believe that any man on earth is infallible, despite the fact the Pope declares himself to be that in certain circumstances when he speaks ex cathedra. But I am encouraged by this human's leadership, and I think it's because he was grounded in South America and he's seen the other side, and he hasn't lived in the palace of the Vatican,
Right.
and has done things to resist that so it might not change him. I think all of these are good, both symbols and substantial things that should matter to us.
Yeah, I agree. Any other thoughts?
Well, as John pointed out, he's still relatively new as popes go. So I think that it's early enough. We have enough to comment on, but we don't really know where the Pope is going to take the Church at this particular point in time. He's made a number of steps that the Vatican has actually wound up walking back after they have been either interpreted or misinterpreted or whatever they are. It's not clear. But the one thing that John talked about that I think is clearly going to be his legacy is to re-emphasize the Church's ministry focusing on helping the poor. I think that is really going to be his lasting legacy over the course of his term of office, and I think that's a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Yes, it is. And I think also his inclusiveness as far as being more welcoming towards the gay community, for example, and
Well, the divorce community,
And the divorce
but the gay comments were one of the things that the Vatican walked back after he said what he said. So, we'll see where that comes. And
Right.
actually what they said was, well, he really didn't say anything different from what previous popes have said. He just said it in a different way. So, it's going to take, that's one of the ones we're going to have to look back at this 5, 10, 15 years from now and see what that was really all about.
yeah.
But the focus on the poor, I think, is already deeply ingrained. I think the momentum is there, and it's just going to continue, and it's a wonderful thing.
Well, I'm hoping that the Church eventually offers leadership positions to women, spiritual leadership positions.
Are you
the
talking
last-
about priesthood?
I'm talking about priesthood,
Okay.
bishophood, cardinalhood, possibly even popehood.
Well, the last
someday,
the
not in
last
our
post
lifetime.
repressed an Irish bishop who believed in that, and I think he was right. And the thing is, I'm trying to remember his name, and I think his name was Flannery. I'm not sure, because I think that's how I ran into his leadership in Ireland. He's a great writer, and he was very popular until he wasn't in the church.
All right, moving on. Another big thing in the news that has a lot of political implications, of course, is President Obama's executive order to pardon immigrants.
I see the sparks coming already.
I did too. That's right. Yeah.
Undocumented immigrants who have children born in this country and have been here, I guess, at least 5 years, I believe, or longer. So, what do you think about that, Phyllis?
Well, I don't know if I would call it a pardon, and I definitely wouldn't call it an amnesty. I think that what he has said is they want them to come out of the shadows, to register, to find out who was here and are they working, and to get people kind of on the grid, who are at this point below the grid, which is a problem for many reasons, tax reasons, and obviously people who are below the grid can be much more easily taken advantage of and things like that. You know, the issue, first of all, I support what President Obama has done. Secondly, the issue is, from the other side, I have heard a lot of yelling and screaming and hollering about this shouldn't have been done, yet never an answer. And if the answer is let's secure the borders, the facts are the facts. And the facts are that President Obama has deported more people than every other president combined. The facts are that he has put more people on the border for border security than every other president in the past. The facts are we're not exactly sure the number of people who are in the country on undocumented status, but we do know we can't possibly deport them all. The facts are that President Reagan had a similar policy and President Bush had a similar policy. And you know, the ideal that we just scream, close the borders, when in fact that's being done is not an answer. So if the other side of the aisle is willing to sit down and actually come up with an answer, a plan, something, then President Obama can work with that. But otherwise, screaming border security and close the border, when that's already happening, and happening in numbers that were far greater than any other president in the past.
But I don't think you could possibly say the border's closed.
I didn't say the border was closed.
Not
I
even
didn't say
closed.
that.
And
I didn't say that.
The Canadian border is not secure. The Mexican border is not secure. None of them are secure.
And let's face it,
We
how
have
many
been concerned
people?
about Canadians.
They're not even
How many
closed.
people have
Well,
been
I'm
screaming
pointing
and
that
yelling
out
about
because
Canadians
people then
coming
say,
across
what
the
about
border?
Canada? But I'm saying not
be
even the
real
Canadian
clear.
border is secure.
And I haven't said they're closed, but I've said that they are more secure, and he's put more guards on the border than any previous president, and has deported more people than all presidents combined.
and
Those
still
are facts.
insecure.
Those are facts. So what do? Give us an answer.
All right, I'll give you an answer.
Okay.
First of all, for the record, people should know that yes, the way this administration counts deportations, they are leading the pack, but they're doing something that no previous administration has ever done, which is when they find somebody at the border and they turn them away, they're counting that as a deportation, which no other administration
But are you admitting that they're finding them and turning them away? And other administrations didn't do that either.
No, other administrations would
Not
do that,
to the
but
same
they
number.
didn't count them as
Not to the
deportations.
same number, Mike.
Okay.
I don't know.
I
don't know, but what about-
There's two things here. There's policy and there's procedure.
Okay.
Now, I don't speak for the Republican Party. I don't speak for the conservative cause. But most of what the president did in terms of policy, I would ultimately wind up supporting either in a piecemeal piece of legislation or in a comprehensive legislation. I have minor objections to his policy. I have vehement objections to the way he did it. I don't think that he has the authority. You know, the big inflammatory terms of king, emperor, etc., are things that resonate with me. I think doing violence to our Constitution, which I think, my opinion, is what he's doing, is a very, very serious thing. And in other circumstances, the Congress would be inclined to take action on that, but they're not going to. So it's going to be a stalemate for 2 years because the well is so poisoned and the trust is so non-existent that we're going to have a stalemate for 2 years, and we'll start again in 17 with whatever players are on the stage.
Well, number one, what's the difference between the executive order of President Obama and executive orders of
Okay.
other presidents?
Size and scope.
Size, scope, and trigger.
And number two is he's invited Congress.
Right. Well, okay. You know, and
To do what he-
and
President Bush.
He's invited Congress to do what he wants, and if Congress doesn't do what he wants, he will do it from executive power.
It was the Senate passed the
imagine
bill.
if
It's
a
not what he wanted. It was a
Republican president
representative
did that
body.
on,
President-
say,
President
capital
did-
gains. A future Republican president decides capital gains are hurting the economy, so he's going to instruct the IRS not to
collect them.
enforce,
Yeah.
not to collect the capital gains tax.
Okay, a
Prosecutorial
couple of things.
discretion.
A couple,
Right?
a couple of things.
I know plenty of
He
things
has
can
asked them to
be
do
done.
something, and a bill was passed out the Senate and set in the House for 521 days. That's the first
And
thing.
they said no.
That's the
That's
first thing.
how
That's the first
government
thing. That's the
works.
first.
No,
No,
that's
that's
how
how
government
government
does
doesn't
not
work.
vote on
That's not.
things.
That's a non-working government.
Like-
It's amazing that
like
you
it-
think something can sit in the House for over 521 days, and you call that a working
Well, hold
government.
it.
That gives us a glimpse into the
I
Republican
understand.
Party's
The next-
mindset.
the next
And I'm not
Republican-
done.
the
I'm
next
not done. I'm not
Republican
done. The
president
next
that
thing
comes
is
in.
over 100 constitutional lawyers,
In the
of which
year
Mr. Obama
3000.
is himself, have looked at what he's done, and they said he does have the constitutional authority to do that. And you name me one constitutional attorney who said he does not have the constitutional authority to have done that. So the words of Emperor King, they may resonate, but they mean nothing when the Constitution
You have the
allows
discretion.
it.
Hold
You
on.
have
Well,
the
let me
discretion.
get
You
it.
have the discretion to bring or not bring cases. For one thing, Congress has not given enough money in the budget to prosecute deportations more than are being prosecuted now.
Okay.
We cannot afford.
Somebody
we have
here-
chosen not to afford or to spend the money necessary.
Somebody here has
we
to
have
defend the
wait,
checks
wait, let
and
me
balances
finish.
of
Let
the
me Well, the
Constitution.
checks and balances are paralysis
forget the
right
checks
now.
and balances,
No,
blah, blah,
no.
blah.
The checks.
That's how you get a
Okay.
dictator.
The
Yeah.
Pesky
executive
little
has the
Constitution.
power. The executive has the power to do what he's doing.
And
He can do what he's doing, and Congress is not acting.
When there is another Republican president, and if we're still having this show,
We've had
then-
Republican presidents who've
and
done the
they are
same
doing, and
thing.
I'm not debating the issue. The issue, in this case, the issue isn't even. This is beside the point. It's the process. The process
The
is
process
the
is
president
what?
is overreaching, and if he's overreaching on something.
Was it
on a
overreaching when
policy,
President Reagan did it? Was
if-
it overreaching when President Bush did it?
And that's
But no, answer
what
the question, but
President-
was
yeah,
it?
the question is this is not even the same size, not even the same
Was it
scope.
overreaching?
This
Well,
is,
Well,
this
it's
is like
just-
a
it's
different.
the same
Hold on, hold on,
principle.
hold on,
It's
hold
the
on.
same
I know we
principle.
don't want to talk about the Constitution because it's an inconvenient fact, but
Tell me the
if there
provision
is
in
a
the Constitution
Republican-
he's violating.
If there is a
Tell me the provision he's violating.
the
Name
next
it.
the next
Name
time there's
it.
a Republican president, and if he
No,
were
no,
to-
no, no, no.
he or she
Tell me the
were
specific
to-
provision
were
in the
to-
Constitution he's violating.
I'd like
There
to try to
isn't one.
finish the sentence first. If a Republican president were to extend their power
Mike
like
has the
this,
Constitution with him. You could ask
would
him.
lose your minds.
Show me the
They've
provision.
done it. They've
You-
done
here,
it.
give
and
me
the
the
Republican Party
give me the
didn't lose their mind.
Constitution. Okay,
We're
here
not
it is.
gonna
Here's the
enforce the
book.
law at all.
Where does it? Tell me the provision our president is violating. Which one?
You just
All right.
gave him a
Here's,
prop.
Wow.
here's
Wow.
here's what I want to say.
Yeah.
Show-
Oh my
show me-
God.
I'm sorry,
Why don't
show
we do
me
it?
in
You know,
there.
let's
John,
put it to
show
our
me in
forehead
there.
and see if you know, see if it comes into my
John,
mind.
okay.
What provision?
Okay,
the
you know what,
John,
guys?
here's what I want to know. I will grant you there are arguments on both sides as to whether he has the authority to program the priorities of the country, where our resources are going to go, and whether
Okay.
or not you're going to call this prosecutorial discretion. There are good arguments that no way, and there are good arguments that yeah, some way. What I don't see at all is where does he get either the constitutional authority or the statutory authority to grant documentation to them? That's the thing that just
But he
totally
didn't,
boggles
but
my
he
mind.
hasn't granted documentation
He's
to
giving
them.
them. He's giving
No,
them
he
work
hasn't.
permits.
And you
He's
still
that-
haven't
that's
answered
a
the past
They have-
question.
they have the authority to
What
do that.
we
No,
do?
under what?
George
I
Bush?
just
We still
help me
haven't
out
said
here.
that.
But hold it.
We still haven't answered that
that is
question.
concerning. That's
But-
concerning to me. Hold it, because if you say, "Well, Congress isn't doing
Is that
things
my
that we
voice?
want," what do we do? Well, it sounds
I
like what
didn't
you're
say
saying
that.
is martial
I just
law.
Said, no,
No,
I didn't say that.
I
I
mean,
said
martial
that's
law,
the
what you
other
do
options
is
on the
you have
table, which you
Martial
have
law
not
is
done
You
that.
true.
have
troops.
elections.
Martial law is
People get
troops.
elected, and if you keep
We're
And
electing
then they
troops,
do nothing
people-
for 521
Okay.
days, and you say that's how
And
this
what's
should
your
work.
solution?
And you
Your
say that's how that
solution.
should work.
Exercise executive
You have
Your
a
solution is
solution, and you say
dictatorship.
do nothing.
Can we
it's
go
how it
No,
should
it's
work.
not a-
here?
Marlene has,
The
I
solution
believe
is
Marlene
not
has
for
her
the
extra
president to
question.
violate the Constitution.
We're going to call a truce here. Obviously, we're not going to come to any
Well, nothing's getting
agreement.
done on this show.
And
Therefore, we're going to have
it's
martial
like
law
Congress
and,
here. It's like Congress here. We're going to
We
move
started
on.
out so calmly. It's beautiful. So elegant. The
We
chaos.
all said nice things about the mayor.
Okay.
Well, it's
So
deserved.
this is called "And the Beat Goes On." My producer, or
The
my
beat,
co-producer, did want to throw that in. The beat goes on, and these are examples of
Police
Wait.
violence.
police violence, right? Yes, police violence, and also white on black, basically, is
And a
is the only
failed
way you can
judicial
say
system.
it. The police shooting and killing of Michael Brown, the chokehold killing of Eric Garner, the killing of Tamir Rice, the 12-year-old with the BB gun in Cleveland, and in John Crawford, the guy that was purchasing or wanted to purchase a toy gun in Walmart.
I don't think it was a toy. I think it was a real gun.
No, it was a
Was it a toy
It was a
gun?
toy gun. Yeah.
Is it toy gun?
He had picked
Yeah,
it
it
up
was.
off the shelf.
All right.
Yeah.
No, I saw him pick it up off the shelf. Or I saw the tape of it, but I didn't. I thought it was.
Yeah.
All right.
No. It
Toy-
was a
toy
gun
gun.
that looked. They're making toy guns apparently to look pretty realistic.
That's the amazing thing about communication these days, that we
Yeah.
see
So
these things.
I know. Who would like to jump in and talk about this?
Well, I'll set up the proposition. We can all jump around.
I know where this is going, John.
Well, no, I don't know. When people come into my office in a criminal case and they find out that the rules as applied are different than they were taught in school, then they say the system's unfair. And some of my friends say, because of my political coloration, oh, so then they become liberals. I said, no, it's not about liberals or conservatives. It's about the fairness that we were taught applies in our system. And when it doesn't happen, we get angry. Most of us may not go out and protest, but when it becomes so aggravated, that could happen. So what's wrong here? What's wrong is when a president is saying, as the Brown verdict is being announced by the grand jury, that we should obey the rule of law, our perception is that there are two rules of law, if not more. And there's one for the political class, from politicians down to police, and then there's the other for us. And here's how the difference works. If we do something wrong, we'll be arrested immediately and we'll be arraigned before a magistrate or somebody, white or black. But if you're of color or you're of a lower socioeconomic background, you have a better chance of being discriminated against more. This is a national problem, independent and precedent to these incidents we're all talking about. Now, those of us who were former prosecutors and do defense work every day, we see this gap between the advertised version of how our system works and how it really works. And how it really works is prosecutors and officers withhold evidence of innocence. They characterize cases. They try to limit the resources of the individuals. It's always a rush to judgment. They may often get it right, but because of the system, they also get it wrong, and they get it terribly wrong. This is a problem that was waiting to happen. Now, the easiest case for the public to agree on may perhaps be the Staten Island case, because in the Staten Island case with Garner, we saw him choked, all of us, because there were like 20 cameras there. Some people say that a cop should wear a little camera so we know what happened. Well, we have a case in which we had 20 cameras. We know what happened. And they say, oh, well, he obviously could breathe because he was saying, I can't breathe. So what? He was lying, as demonstrated by the fact that he died. And then the autopsy said that homicide was the reason, and they explained in detail what it was. And yet a grand jury comes back contradicting all of our impulses, all of our belief system, that whatever the gradation of the offense, they find them justified in killing this guy. So we have protests across America, and I think it reflects the fact that we've, since 9/11, militarized our police force. And instead of peace officers, we have military officers who often act like they're in Fallujah. And if you go out to a shooting range, they're being taught to shoot 2 to the chest, 1 to the head. And so what happens is it becomes a trained response. So when they get into this situation, and we are bringing former military into our police forces, but who are also trained that way. So you have a person in a situation, instead of like an old Irish cop in New York, who'd put up his arm and slap somebody down or talk him down or use his wits to handle the situation. We immediately go to the last possible choice as police officers now, putting a pressure on the older officers to mimic this bad behavior, and we go right to assault and kill. When that kid was shot in that playground, that cop got out of the car. He pulled the car up right next to him, putting himself in harm's way, and he got out of the car and he shot him and immediately ran behind the car. The kid was like dead immediately.
2 seconds.
And there was no evaluation of the scene. Now, why wouldn't you come upon the scene, get between you and critical masses to protect you, and use a speaker system and say, put that gun down, what are you doing, and so forth? And the call said, I'm not sure whether it's a real gun or not. So it's not like he said, he's shooting people, he's menacing people, he's playing people. You know, there was, so where do we stand? We stand at a place where we better reform the system, because if you can't have respect for law and order, then you don't have order, and you have outlaws in a way that people are just angry because the dissociation between what they're told is fair and what they experience is not the same thing. And some people simplify this, and it's a valid consideration, you know, that it's black on white, white on black, that's the problem. But it's not simply racist. It is that it's most obvious because of the abiding racism in America. But beyond that, we have a system that's out of control in terms of the response of our law enforcement to public crime. And some blamed in New York the broken window philosophy, that the most minor offense is a basis to go crazy to enforce the law. So you level out.
I sense you're coming to the end of your point, John.
I am at the end of my point.
And
forgive me for going so long.
We're coming to the end of this segment.
Oh, so I got to set it up.
Welcome to John Flanders.
Phyllis, when we get back from the break, I see you shaking your head. I know you've got something to say, and I'd like to continue this conversation for a few minutes after we come back from the break. We have a couple of things I think that we can address here, but don't go away. We'll be back in just a minute with more of this exciting show, The Road to. Stay tuned.
Of September 11th, there have been hundreds of violent attacks against innocent Americans.
Remember what that flag you're waving stands for. Remember, please stop the hate.
We're stronger when we are united.
Remember what that flag you're waving stands for. One nation.
Under God.
Indivisible.
With liberty.
And justice.
For all.
In America, there's either room for everyone, or it's not America.
Don't pick the wrong fight.
Let's keep America land of the free.
Stop the hate.
You'd never know it on the battlefield, but nearly half of today's military are National Guard and reservists. However, they can't answer our nation's call without their employer's support. If you're an employer, visit esgr.org and find out how to do your part. After all, their response depends on yours.
This is Mommy's bed. Me and Jenny were jumping on it. Mommy's gun fell on the floor. I was a cowboy. Bang, 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 bang. I said, Jenny, wake up, it's just pretend. But she wouldn't wake up.
I'm sick of this. I'm sick of dealing with you. I'm sick of
I work 6 days a week.
Who
do you think you
Stand
are?
up straight. Don't you ever talk back to me again! You just shut up!
What are you crying about?
What a child learns about violence, a child learns for life. Teach carefully. We can show you how. Act Against Violence. Call 877-ACT-WISE for a free brochure.
Sweetheart, smoke outside now. You promise.
Okay, hon.
Sweetheart, smoke outside now. You promise.
What kind of man are you?
I'm a father.
Look here, my father was a father, and he smoked his brains out in the house.
Watch as he blows those smoke rings on my little red face. probably have asthma.
Asthma? Schlasma. I'm telling you, nothing's gonna happen to your kids.
Don't swear when you're lying. You know very well that thousands of kids get bronchitis, ear infections, and even pneumonia from their parents' cigarette smoke. And didn't you promise your little angels you'd smoke outside?
Hey, Daddy.
Those little devils are just so sweet.
Do the right thing.
Please, smoke outside.
Until you can stop, go out for your kids.
Take the pledge. Call 1-800-513-1157.
As time flows on, there are places we return to again and again. Precious places. Timeless places. Places that with your help can endure forever. I'm Paul Newman. Help the Nature Conservancy save the last great places around the world.
Welcome back to The Road To. We were having a discussion about police violence, and particularly police violence as it applies to the races, racial discrimination, that is. And Phyllis, I saw you shaking your head as John was talking. You are on the Board of Corrections, as you mentioned. You're a mental health worker.
I'm a mental health therapist, and I happen to actually work at a jail. So I'm a mental health therapist in a jail. And so I should first say that, you know, the vast majority, 90+% of police officers and law enforcement officers do their job, and they do them well, and we would not have a society that ran as it does without them. And so we cannot kind of implicate all law enforcement officers, and we should say that up front. Having said that, it is ridiculous to think that African Americans and people of color think the system works for us. We know the system doesn't work for us, and the idea that we are somehow confused by that is just fallacy and wrong. And really, it's not about just Michael Brown or just Eric Gardner. If it were just about a couple of people here and there that get young men that get killed, then we wouldn't have mass protests on streets. A couple of weeks ago, there was a gentleman, he happened to be a white gentleman, who was drunk and sitting on a corner on the curb, and he was swinging a loaded pistol, and police officers standing beside him. Two police officers very slowly and very calmly approached him, sat down next to him on the curb, talked to him, and got the gun from him. He was drunk with a loaded gun. Nothing happened to him. He was arrested for brandishing a weapon. Had he been black or of color, he'd be dead. So the issue is not just that, you know, if you see a gun, you shoot. The issue is Kendrick McDade, who was 19 years old in California. There was a call that there was a person who had robbed the store. Police pull up. He walks out of the McDonald's with McDonald's in his hands. Nothing at all but McDonald's. They shoot him dead. Last words out of his mouth: "Why did they shoot me?" The issue is Irvin Jackson, who was 16 years old, who was trying to protect his sister from a group of girls beating him up. Police drove up, shot him, did not have a weapon. The issue is the fact that in Virginia, 9% of people in Virginia are African American males, and they are 57% of the prison population. The issue is that when you are stopped by a police officer and you are a person of color, you are 21% more likely to die at the hands of the police officer than a person not of color. The issue is men and boys of color get much harsher and much longer sentences for the same crimes that somebody who was white would not get, and for the same similar records. So it's not just about a Michael Brown, or it's not just about a Jordan Davis, and it's not just about a Trayvon Martin, or it's not just about an Oscar Grant, a Wendell Allen, a Travis McGee, a Sean Bell. I could go on and on and on and on of names of men of color who were killed unarmed, not swinging a gun, but unarmed by police officers. And those same things do not happen to white America. For some reason, if it's white America, you're much more likely to walk away from an encounter with a police officer. And let me say one more thing. I have sons. I have two sons. And when they come home or when they drive, I have a son in college who drives from North Carolina home. And I say to him every day before he gets in the car, "Sean, before you get in your car, say a prayer." And when I say a prayer, I'm not just praying that he doesn't get in an accident. I'm praying that he doesn't have any contact with law enforcement, because although I've set my African American son down and taught him how to live through an encounter with law enforcement, how to not get beat when they stop you, I'm also afraid that he will be beat, even though he's doing nothing. And I am afraid that the only recourse I have is praying to God that my son does not get stopped and end up beat or dead. So the issue is not a person or a person with a gun. Yes, if a police officer sees somebody with a gun, then they may shoot, but they don't shoot you to the same degree, nearly the same degree, if you're not a person of color. These are facts, these are true, and if we keep having one conversation when one thing happens, we're not going to take care of the issue. We have to have a national conversation, and it has to be led by thought leaders of the country, not people who are inflammatory, not people who deny that there's ever a problem, not people who call everything racist, because everything's not racist. But we have to have thoughtful leaders, the Deval Patricks, the Cory Bookers in Virginia, the Jennifer McCullums, the Michael Feddrals, to lead these conversations. We can't deny that there is a problem, and we can't deny that the problem affects people of color, and especially men of color, at a vastly higher rate than everybody else.
Well, instead of praying to God, I would prosecute cops.
And instead of both.
Well, I think one is more worthwhile than the other, and I think that if we actually put some teeth in the law and treated the cops the same way we would treat you or I if we were to do anything even slightly less.
Well, you and I might not be treated the same, though, John. That's the point I'm making.
Well, we will not be treated the same, but we will be treated differently, both of us, than a police officer who's charged with anything.
With that.
Well, that's
and
true.
It's clear that our history, the curse of America, goes back to the first lies about the equal rights between people unless they had wealth and unless they were persons of color. And we don't seem to be able to get over it. We've gone through the Civil Rights Act and everything, and we talk about Darwinian progress, and America is the proof that we do not have progress. That if you're not vigilant, you slide and it gets worse again. And we're at that point. And we have immunity for prosecutors who lie and withhold information, even like in the Stevens case involving a white defendant. Imagine if it was a black. And we have cops who are in America now who are deciding they wear plastic gloves when they arrest you. Irish cops in New York would never have done that. And you can be sure they put it on more if they're touching a black skin instead of a white skin. We never talk about the key issues in America.
I'm not sure that all police officers in the old days were as gentle as you are portraying.
Well, I'd rather be beat up than shot to death. I'll tell you that, and that's a difference.
I mean, we talk about progress. Let me ask you this: what is the Obama Justice Department doing about some of these cases that you disagree with?
Not enough.
Are they not bringing charges?
Well, I'm hoping they're going to bring a. But first of all, I believe they are looking more seriously because of all the evidence in the New York case on a civil rights violation.
They are.
Because the prosecutors did everything they could in the grand jury, and being an obsessive, I read thousands of pages of it because I thought it was a classic study and using the grand jury as a cover-up. They did everything they could to destroy the witnesses, including Johnson, the only surviving other witness to the incident, because Brown was killed and you have the officer, and he was corroborated by lots of people, and in the grand jury they tried to beat him down. So what you have is you have the wagon circle to protect the cop every way possible by destroying opposing witnesses and things like that, and then they get immunity from prosecution. Prosecutors get the most amazing immunity.
Are true, but I'm not saying that what you're saying is not correct, John, because what you're saying is correct. I am saying that we can't just talk about the system and not actually admit that when people of color have interactions with police officers, we are much more likely in the same situations to come out beat or dead. That is an issue that we have to face, admit, and discuss. 21 times more likely to die at the hands of a police officer. That's a real statistic. And these are people who don't have weapons. When somebody who has a weapon who's not of color, the police are trained in de-escalation techniques. They don't seem to use them quite as often. I'm not saying no, they don't ever use them, nor am I saying all the police in every situation, obviously. But de-escalation techniques are not used quite as often. There's a study recently done, and it said that America actually sees children of color as less innocent. That's an issue. When our children are not actually considered as innocent, that's an issue. When our children can't make a mistake without getting shot, that's an issue. And that's the issue that we're talking about, or more importantly, it's the issue that we're not talking about. And white America has decided that black America has two leaders, and they kind of go to those two people. But I'm telling you what, black America talks on black Jesse and Al.
Jesse and Al.
I mean, I honestly didn't know what you were talking about.
Black Americans
I was saying President Obama.
No, Black Americans talk about these issues all the time. We talk about these issues in our churches. We talk about these issues at our meetings, at our sorority meetings, at a Jack and Jill, at a Lynx meeting. These are issues that we discuss all the time. We discuss black on black crime in our neighborhoods. We discuss these issues all the time. And frankly, what you're seeing right now is a tipping point, because the names you have heard are Trayvon Martin and Jordan Davis and Eric Gardner. But Black America knows the scores, dozens, hundreds of names of our boys and our men that get killed that never rise to the surface of the mainstream media, but they are dead and buried all the same. And that is the frustration that is starting to leak over, and that is what you're feeling, and that is what's not being understood and not being talked about. It is something happening to us.
What white America does.
I have to say that, you know, what Phyllis said about instructing her boys, and I heard an African American woman in Ferguson, I believe, comment that Michael Brown must have not been taught correctly how to respond.
How to survive. How to survive a police stop.
But nevertheless, if you're a white parent, you don't usually consciously think about sitting down your children, and it's particularly your sons, because it's particularly males that are being murdered, and give them that instruction.
Well, you do if you're from the South Bronx, where I was from. And let me say something else about the Brown case. What Wilson, the cop, admitted to doing was he drove the car up, and he said to them, "Please get on the sidewalk." And Johnson said, "Get the F on the sidewalk." Then he said nothing about any cigarillo heist. Then he drives a little bit further, and he turns his car around in a way you rarely see. He pulled the wheel around, so the car came around, and the driver's side was right next to Brown and Johnson. And he opened the door and hit Brown. If that's not provocative, what is? If that's not stimulated by racism, then what is it stimulated by? Mm-hmm. And according to Johnson, he reaches through the window and he grabs Brown, and there's only one shot fired, and then they both run like mad. The cop walks past Johnson hiding behind a car, not interested in him, and he fast walks. He never says freeze or anything. He shoots the gun, and witnesses saw it brush against his bicep, and Michael Baden confirmed, the medical examiner, that the bullet went through the back of his arm forward.
And what's the point?
Well, the point is...
Because we have to move on.
Well, the point is that it's not that Brown did something wrong or had very many options in the circumstance. He was at least going to get a bad beating or get arrested, and it turned out to be much worse because he had violated the first principle, contempt of cop, and he was black. And white America, if they don't stand by our brothers and sisters of color, they'll come next for them. And they're already discriminating against people in all criminal cases in terms of the rule of law between cops and citizens. And it's only going to get worse if we don't stand together to stop this injustice in America, presently overwhelmingly against people of color.
I know we have to move on. I want to make one last statement. I want to stop. I want to end with what I said when I started, which is we know that this is not every police officer. We know that the vast majority of law enforcement, I work with them every day. Do their jobs, do it well, and do it without prejudice. So we should say that again.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to our predictions from the last show, and Phyllis, I know you weren't here for that, but
I would have been completely correct had I been here.
Oh, would you? Okay.
100%.
I was like practically 100% wrong, but not 100%. Okay, so Mark Warner and Ed Gillespie, that was the big shocker in my opinion. I was sure that Senator Warner was going to get reelected with at least in double digits, and it turned out to be a close race. So who predicted that it was going to be?
Well, I think Mike said it was going to be close.
Who predicted that Senator Warner was going to get reelected?
I think I said, all right, I predicted Warner would get reelected, but I think I said it was going to be something like McAuliffe-Cuccinelli close.
Yeah, I think you did.
I said Gillespie was going to win, so I came pretty close.
I said Warner was going to win, but I thought it was going to be a bigger margin.
Yeah,
and,
I said double digits.
And there are probably several ways to look at how that happened, but none of which are favorable to Mark.
Republicans did well, yeah.
No, but it's more complicated. Yes, they did well. They did well, but it's more complicated.
I would have said it had been close. I would have thought Warner was going to win, but I was going to be close. But I thought the turnout was going to be horribly low amongst Democrats and young people, and it was. In fact, the lowest in I think 72 years. The turnout ridiculously low.
But the turnout has been going down over time, so I'm not sure it's that dramatic from the last time.
Well, for midterms.
Well, midterms are
historically low. Yeah.
Midterms are low.
They are. Okay, what about? I think this is kind of a no-brainer. Don Beyer and Micah Edmund, who thought Beyer was going to win.
I think his name was Micah Edwards.
Edmund.
Is it Edmunds? Okay.
E-D-M-O-N-D.
Okay.
No
Singular.
S.
Okay.
Edmund. Not Munds.
Okay, understand.
Right.
There's,
I
don't dance
Beyer
on
was
the
gonna
grave
win,
of it.
no
I
problem.
thought, I think that it was the district, and it was the primary was going to probably determine the outcome. Unless there was a big error.
The 8th district, like many districts, but the 8th district is just a textbook example of a throwaway district. It's
it's much more secure than the 10th.
It's not going to be competitive,
and much more democratic than the 10th is Republican.
Right. What about John Faust and Barbara Comstock?
Well, I think it's easy 2020 to look back on it, but I think the error was not coming out strong at the beginning to define her, and he defined himself by a gap.
He tried to define her in an inaccurate manner. He spent a lot of money trying to define her as a horrible person, which didn't work because people knew her.
Well, I think
people didn't vote.
I think he waited too long, and I think GOTV is critical.
Jeff Barnett, actually, who ran for Congress in that very district, did some numbers and said that the 10th is about Republican plus 2. If it's Republican plus 2, then John Faust did not do very well. And that's unfortunate because John Faust is a very good, decent, and honorable man, and it's one of these people that you hope that they keep on serving. But it's a tough loss for him.
Yeah.
I have a question about this race, not the race, but post. And it has to do with the political dialogue that we engage in sometimes and whether it's over the top. I was a little disappointed. I'm on everybody's mailing list, including the Democratic Party of Virginia. I was a little disappointed to get an email from them on Wednesday talking about how they had a chance to capture the seat. It was an endorsement of Kathleen Murphy running in that thing.
Oh, right.
And we can get Republican sleazebag Barbara Comstock's seat in this one. Is this a little over the top, do you think?
I think that
I didn't get an email.
I didn't get that, but I'm going to trust. I didn't see it, but I'm going to trust what you said is true, and that would be not just a little over the top. That would be ridiculously over the top.
Really?
And I have no trouble saying that whatsoever.
I think we had some children in this campaign who were writing stuff that don't have any sense, in my opinion. I mean, I wrote editorials and talked to Republican friends as well.
Well,
I have more than just you two.
We've descended to the point, I think, where everybody is, it happens on all sides, everybody's competing for the most outlandish statement so that they're the ones who get the quote.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it diminishes, I think, what we're all about.
It really does. It really does. And I completely agree with that.
Do you think that the negative commercials helped in the case of Gillespie and in the case of Comstock?
Well, negative commercials always work. Unfortunately, negative commercials always work. I think, look, there were two reasons that Barbara won that seat. Number one is that she was more likely than John Faust to be viewed as the logical successor to Frank Wolf. And then the second reason was at some point it became obvious to the National Democratic money that they had some incumbents they needed to save, and they shifted all the money they had reserved for Faust out of his district to save the incumbents, and he was left dangling.
She's a fantastic campaigner, and she's done the work in the district.
I also think in the future for the Democrats it would be wise to choose somebody like a Karen Schultz from like the Winchester Chester area. You can't keep choosing people from the McLean area for the 10th because people out in the Winchester are not going to vote for that person. So it's also candidate choice. Not that John Pauster is not a wonderful person, he really is, but you have to be logical and kind of strategic.
But they did vote for Barbara. They did vote for
they didn't
Barbara,
vote at all.
and she's from the McLean
They didn't vote at all.
Well, let me say
they didn't vote at all.
Well, the people of the overall people of the district.
We do need to.
Well, let me finish one thing about Barbara, though, because I think it's instructive to Democrats. Putting aside content, she was on the ground all over the district. I mean, she put in the shoe leather.
Yeah.
And I write weekly, what I call happy stories in the Lovettsville area. She was there a number of times, and there was no Democrat there. And I called, and they didn't come. And she wasn't just there.
Yeah.
She had signs, she had balloons, she talked to people.
Yeah.
It was low intensity, meaning, hi, how are you? It wasn't, and.
She's disarming.
She's a capable
Her
individual.
personal style is very disarming. You like her when you.
Well,
I debated her on TV, and I found her very
nice. But she was a good campaigner.
All right, and what about the 11th congressional district, Jerry Conley?
Well, it wasn't easy this year, but he did it. I don't think there was much question. Beyer was a simpler choice.
When Jerry was first elected, it was very close the first time, and then they went into redistricting, and they gave him a safe seat. It's not as safe as the 8th. But I do think that it would take an extraordinary event for that thing to become competitive.
And he works hard. I mean, he's satisfying the constituent question, and his policies have not been out of line with the district.
Well, I disagree with that.
So anyway, we're moving
Enough
on
of the
now.
district.
I would like to get your opinions on what are the main local and state issues now that the candidates, the Democrats and the Republicans, and their candidates need to fully address for looking forward to 2015.
Well, we need to be concerned about the gas tax that's coming January 1. The gas tax will go up in Virginia based on legislation they already passed, and the gas prices will go up about 5 cents a gallon. So I think one of the first order of business for the General Assembly is to repeal that gas tax increase.
I'm so surprised you would say that. Gosh, you're talking about taxes.
I wanted to let everybody know. Fill up on
all the issues. That's the one.
Fill up on New Year's Eve.
Well, one of the issues we
when gases are
possibly and some of the lowest gas tax in the country Virginia has also.
We do. We have the transportation package that was passed 2 years ago.
Right, exactly. 2 years ago, who was governor?
No, it was last year.
2 years ago.
It is unfortunate. It is unfortunate that
part of the
Republican was so busy defending his criminal case.
It is unfortunate that the Republican governor Bob McDonnell gave the Democrats everything they wanted on that. I agree. He should not have given the Democrats what they wanted.
Well, Obama was still president, so it's probably his fault.
All right. I mean, there'll be talk and there'll be activity on the gas tax, but it's not going to be repealed.
It's not going to be
repealed. So what do you think?
So I think the real interesting thing here is Governor McAuliffe's proposal. He calls himself open to it. That's parlance for a proposal to reinstitute the car tax. I think that the budget is still it's not balanced. We have a depressed economy still, and it's either more revenues or it's less spending. And when the governor floated the idea of, I'm very open to repealing that, silly little car tax thing, that's going to be a very interesting thing as it plays out.
It is going to be interesting, but I think what's important to know is he doesn't have to reinstitute the full car tax.
Yeah.
He can actually do it in
right. You can do it in increments, right?
In increments, and see. And
right now it's capped at like 900 million or something like that. I think that's what it is. Capped at 900 million.
The other thing is we do have a budget deficit, and unfortunately, the much of the revenue makeup has been on the Department of Corrections in Virginia, which is a problem. The Department of Corrections, it took 90% of the
cuts.
hit of the cuts, which is a problem because this issue that you can just keep cutting corrections and not have long-term problems. You can't. You have to have programs. You need to do things because people.
Do you have an opinion on the closing of the 2 prisons that they did over the summer?
I do. In fact, I was down there when that happened. So they closed they closed more than 2. They closed Powertown. They closed White Post. They didn't open the Women's Diversion Center. So what they did instead was they moved all the prisoners to other
Creating overcrowding?
Creating overcrowding. But the other issues, creating overcrowding in the prisons and then creating a backlog at the local jails. So people will sit in the local jails for 2 to 3 years, which is a very long time. And overall, you're going to have less things like programming, employment groups, GED programs. So you have people come out of jail in no better shape, really, than when they go into jail, which leads to higher recidivism rates. And so although it's always easy to cut the prison funds because they don't have a natural lobbyist. I mean, who goes down to the General Assembly and say, "Hey, I want to lobby for all those prisoners"? That never happens.
There was one person.
They have lobbyists.
No, they don't.
No, there are plenty of groups.
I've been
down
they have
there.
lobbyists for things like for things
I've been
like
there where there are interest groups that are there all the time
and
promoting.
there are things like having voter rights reinstated, things like that. But there's not a lot of groups for keeping money in the prisons. There's not.
Some of those are privatized. I mean, yeah.
We have one private prison. We have one. I sit in the board.
They're lobbyists.
I sit in the board.
I've seen
I
them.
would think that would be fodder for a whole show.
testimony.
Anyway. When you cut those funds, the recidivism rates go up, and so that's a problem. I also want to say that in Loudoun, I'll be Loudoun specific. That's where I live. The issue for 2015 is going to be education. It's going to be education.
Absolutely.
And that's what the supervisors and the school board will run on this year is education. The fact that the Loudoun County School Board fairly well, they made, our supervisory board also made some pretty big errors, and I think they've underestimated the will of the people to put them out of office.
Well, it's going to be worse this year, I understand.
It's going to be an interesting year in Loudoun. I don't know about Fairfax, Arlington, but
$40-some million
gap.
Yeah.
Although these are all gaps in, all of these systems, I guess, are getting much more money than they. They're just not getting as much as they're asking.
They're not getting money to meet the need of the new students who are entering the system. So it's not that they want new things; is they want to serve the kids who were there and are coming.
But
they're not asking for new things.
In many instances, the cost per student is going up. Also,
not in Loudoun, it hasn't.
I don't know. There was a chart that came out recently of the per student.
Anyway, we have a minute and a half left. We have a special election coming up January 6th of 2015 for the Barbara Comstock former seat in the House of Delegates between Pariseau, I think his name is, Gary or Greg Pariseau?
Craig.
Craig Pariseau and Kathleen Murphy. So we might as well do a prediction on that. What do you think, guys? What do you think?
I think he's got a pretty good shot. It's a special election. Republicans are pretty energized. He's a first-time candidate, so he's not as experienced as Barbara in campaigning, but a lot of folks are helping him out, and I think he's got a pretty good shot.
Well, I think I understand that he's just recently moved in from Maryland just in the last year or so.
I think Kathleen Murphy's going to win this seat. I think for a couple of reasons. One, special elections are notoriously low turnout, and so a lot of things rely on name recognition, which she has more of because she ran against Barbara Comstock already, and she came close, and she's actually a very good campaigner. She's kind of on the ground everywhere, also working very hard. They really are hitting every door, and so I'm going to say Kathleen Murphy's going to pull this one out.
I'll give some advice to both of them. A special election is not about issues. A special election is not about debates. If they've scheduled any debates, they're whole fools.
Right.
Special election is about finding your people and getting them to the polls.
Yeah, okay.
And so if they're focused on that.
Yeah, you're right.
I was hoping the special election was going to be about President Obama.
We're out of time. Happy holidays, everybody. Enjoy, and we'll see you in 2015. Take care.